The Sermon of Trees and Being Yourself. In order to have this conversation, in order to talk about what does it look like for each of us to become who we're supposed to be, let's take a look at some famous quotes from church history. I believe that these quotes will be very helpful, and they can even help to give some guardrails as we have this conversation moving forward. First up, the glory of God is man fully alive. Sometimes you might see a translation of this that says the most glorious thing to God is a person fully alive, which is a decent translation from the original Greek. Now, St. Irenaeus of Lyons has got a strong pedigree. What do I mean by that? Well, there's the Apostle John, one of the original 12 apostles of Jesus, who had a disciple, a student, whose name was Polycarp. Polycarp had Irenaeus as a student, and so he was only 2 degrees removed from one of the original 12 apostles, and so his teachings are relatively understood to be quality, to be close to the source, and helpful. But for him to say that the most glorious thing for God is that you and I be fully alive, it very much reframes so much of Christian spirituality. Wouldn't you agree? We also have Thomas Merton, who was a Trappist monk born in France, but then grew up and then joined a monastery down in Kentucky called Our Lady of Gethsemane. He was a prolific writer during the 1950s and 60s, and he said this: "A tree can only give glory to God by being a tree." Oh. For in being what God means it to be, it is obeying him. It consents, so to speak, to his creative love. It is expressing an idea which is in God and which is not distinct from the essence of God, and therefore a tree imitates God by being a tree. The more a tree is like itself, the more it is like him. If it tried to be like something else which it was never intended to be, it would be less like God and therefore would give him less glory. Just as God is fully who God is supposed to be, you can give glory to God by being just who you are supposed to be. Not who other people tell you to be, not even who you think you should be, not who your heroes, your villains, all these people say that you should be. You can give glory to God by just being who you're supposed to be. But that's the question. How do we figure out who we're supposed to be? This was a famous quote from New Seeds of Contemplation. He continues, though, in the same chapter saying this: "For me, to be a saint means to be myself. Therefore, the problem of sanctity and salvation is in fact the problem of finding out who I am and discovering my true self." We will talk about true self in the future video. "Trees and animals have no problem. God makes them what they are without consulting them, and they are perfectly satisfied. With us, it is different. God leaves us free to be whatever we like. We can be ourselves or not as we please. We are at liberty to be real or to be unreal. We may be true or false. The choice is ours. We may wear now one mask and now another, and never, if we so desire, appear with our own true face." This too was from New Seeds of Contemplation. For Thomas Merton, so much of what it means to be a saint is not tied up in what we do. It's tied up in identity. And of course, drawing from the earlier comment that trees give glory to God by just being a tree, that means in order for each of us to become the most fully developed, blossomed, healthy, holy, and saintly version of ourselves, so much is dependent on identity, on not wearing a mask, on presenting our true self, of learning who our true self is, and to stop projecting out a false self. The reality is, we live in a culture that is dominated by hurry, noise, and crowds. And all three of those things can be massive hurdles to figuring out who we are, because our lives are just so hurried, noisy, and full of people who also don't know who they truly are. Crowds. But I want to take a look at one more quote. This comes from Teresa of Avila in her spiritual classic called Interior Castle. Early on, she says this: "What a shame that through our own unconsciousness we do not know ourselves. Wouldn't a person look foolish, friends, if you asked him who he was and he didn't know, had no idea where his father or mother were or what country he came from? If this seems stupid to you, know that our own stupidity is incomparably greater when we do not strive to know who we are." That's from the first chapter of Interior Castle. So even Spanish mystics from the 1500s, they would also say that there's a disconnect that can happen with being human. We get caught up in the flurry of activity. We get caught up in so much of trying to please other people and their expectations for us. But sometimes we fail to recognize that there is an invaluable interior castle, that there's a mansion, that there's just wealth and beauty within, that some people never get the opportunity or they never make the choice to actually explore so that they can actually value it. So, with this in mind, Irenaeus of Lyons, "The glory of God is man fully alive." With Thomas Merton, "For me to be a saint means for me to be myself." And then Teresa of Avila, with this idea that it is a terrible shame that some people have no idea who they really are. With all these things in mind, let's use this as a catapult into our further conversations about what does it look like for you to become who you're supposed to be. Okay? Now, when we talk about being yourself, we need to ask just a few things. What scriptures do we have about this? Well, there's Colossians 3, which says, "For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. Our lives are therefore not hidden in others. The things that we accomplish or fail, or the titles and money we accumulate. Despite this fact, that is where our modern culture encourages us to find ourselves." So let's have some questions. Just a few of them, but I believe that they'd be helpful to do if you have a journal or if you prefer to write and type something up. Go right ahead and do that. First up, do you feel fully alive? What do you think it would take for you to feel fully alive, knowing that that also includes being healthy as well as holy? Are you willing to do whatever is necessary to achieve that? It takes courage. It takes courage to seize your own life and to say, how can I live this life more fully? 2, what does it look like for you to be the healthiest and holiest saint according to your personality? You don't have to be a saint like someone else. Just like Thomas Merton's quote, "For me to be a saint means for me to be myself, not to be someone else and their saint version." And then 3, how well would you say you know yourself? We're going to have another upcoming video that's going to talk about that. How well would you say that you know yourself? Do you know yourself a lot, a little, only what other people have reflected back to you? Or are you living in a false narrative about yourself and you don't even know it? So these are all the things that we're going to be addressing, okay? And I highly encourage, take some time to journal about these questions, and I think you'll find it very helpful, okay? This has been the Sermon of Trees and Being Yourself.